Okay, we are recording now. So before we begin with our slideshow, we would like to introduce ourselves in case you haven't heard of us before, me, Rachelle, and Heshie. So I'll start. My name is Monica Kramer. My pronouns are they, them, and she, her, but I really prefer they, them, if you can swing it, which we'll be talking about today. So that's me, Rachelle.
Hi, I'm Rachelle Schneider. My pronouns are she, her.
Hi, I'm Heshie Zinman, and my pronouns are he, him, his.
Excellent. Okay, we're going to start off the presentation. I'll be sharing my screen, so feel free to follow along on your screen. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to use the chat. Alrighty, can everyone see? Okay, so welcome to our presentation on the language of LGBTQIA+. A bit of a hefty acronym there. So just again, thanks for joining us. That is Adam Eli on the left, who's holding the being Jewish and queer is a thing sign. So some of these people in the presentation we'll have some stories on. Adam Eli is a queer Jewish activist and community organizer in New York City, has a pretty big following on Instagram and does awesome things for the queer Jewish community. So thanks for attending. But before we really dive in, we're going to have Rachelle lead us in the blessing to study Torah.
Yeah, I know everyone is muted, but if you'd like to join me so we can pretend we're physically all together. The blessing for studying Torah. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu, melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of all, who hallows us with mitzvot, commanding us to engage with words of Torah.
All right, thanks, Rachelle. That was beautiful. So we're gonna go ahead and dive right in, and we're gonna start off with the long acronym that you saw here, LGBTQIA+. So this acronym here, I'm just going to read the definition. It does stand for lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, queer and questioning, intersex, asexual, and then the plus sign just means any other identity that falls along that gender and sexuality spectrum. For example, non-binary, which we'll go over later, falls along that spectrum, and that is also how I identify. Rachelle, do you want to take over and tell us a little bit about Duffy?
Yeah, just to jump off the acronym, I just wanted to say I used to. I was a faculty sponsor for a student group, a student LGBTQ group, and we were called the Alphabet Club because there were so many names and definitions, and it's constantly being expounded on and expanding. But that was like a little funny thing that we like to say. We were the Alphabet Club. Okay, so this image on the left is from my book called Speaking Out: Queer Youth in Focus, which very briefly is a photo essay and a collaboration that I did with LGBTQ youth over a period of a decade, where I photograph them and they share their stories and experiences. This image was pulled because I felt that it best represented today's session. And this is Duffy. Duffy says, straight? No. Gay? No. These words don't feel right. They aren't me. Bi? Closer, but still not right. Queer? Yes, I'm queer. That's me. And again, as Monica said, we'll be going over different definitions and names and words. And queer, I think, is an important one to discuss because a lot of people have thought and still think that queer has a negative connotation and or is derogatory. And a lot of people, myself included, have identified as queer and kind of reclaimed the word queer. So we wanted to kind of start it off with that. And very, very small plug. You can read more stories about how people identify and shared experiences at the links below.
Yeah, this presentation will also be available and shareable. I'll send the link out to everyone. Alyssa can probably send it out to everyone. So feel free to follow up. These links will, they are live on my end. So when you have the presentation, you'll be able to click those, learn more about different terms. If you would like to buy Rachelle's book someday, those links are there for you. So that's really our starter here, is just the acronym and what it stands for. A lot of people just shorten it to LGBT or LGBTQ. But the I and the A and the plus are pretty important. And so that's why we wanted to go over that today. Next up, we're going to head to our next slide, which are some key definitions to remember. So Heshie, would you want to start us off with gender identity?
Yes. So gender identity, one's innermost concept of self as male, female, a blend of both or neither. It's how individuals perceive themselves and what they call themselves. Gender identity is intimately related to the concept of gender role, the same as gender expression, which is defined as the outward manifestation of personality that reflect gender identity. I want to say that gender identity is something that occurs before at birth or later, but it occurs before one really has a sense of a knowledge of gender identity. Yeah.
Great. Rachelle, would you like to continue?
Yeah, so sexual orientation is defined as an inherent or immutable enduring emotion, romantic or sexual attraction to other people.
All right. Okay, I didn't know if you wanted to add anything there. I will follow up with gender expression and gender presentation, which is what I like to talk about most. You'll see here the photo on the right. You might recognize this person or not. That is Jacob Tabaya, author of Sissy, A Coming of Gender Story. It's a pretty popular book. It's great on gender. It's great about gender presentation. What exactly does that mean? Well, you have the definition there. It's how you want to outwardly express yourself with fashion, so the clothing that you wear, that you choose to wear, your hair, what kind of styles you wear. It could be your shoes, it could be your voice, your behavior. And I like to talk about gender presentation because I present as masculine of center. So on the gender expression spectrum here, you know, you would say presenting more feminine, more masculine, etc. And so I'm just masculine of center. And even though I was assigned female at birth as my gender identity, I choose to present in a masculine of center way. So I wear a combination of men's clothing, some women's clothing, and it really just comes down to what makes you feel good. How do you want to present yourself to the world? What feels good? What feels right to you? I usually go to a men's barber, for example. I don't go to a hair salon. I go to an actual barber who specializes in men's haircuts. And so that is gender presentation, gender expression. Doesn't always line up, you know, of your sexual orientation necessarily, but typically an external appearance of one's gender identity. So that's that. Again, any questions you have, feel free to put those in the chat. We're going to head on to our next slide. Great. So this is the genderbread person. This is a fantastic slide. It's used oftentimes. You'll see it at all levels of education. It's a really great visual to put these definitions and terms to. So maybe we could break it down here, Heshie and Rachelle. Heshie, do you want to talk a little bit about gender identity and where that is on the genderbread person?
Yes. So gender identity starts in the brain. It has nothing to do with your bits, but has everything to do with your brain. It's how you think about yourself, how you identify yourself, in what role you identify yourself, but it has nothing to do with attraction. Well, it has everything to do with attraction, but emotional attraction, not necessarily physical attraction.
Great. And I'll just say here again is gender expression you'll see here is on the outside of the genderbread person. So again, this is your haircut, your shoes, your clothing, what style you have, different types of flair, and everything that makes you feel good about being you. Rachelle?
Yeah, and then we'll move down to the lower bits. So, well, I was thinking the heart, but sorry, yes, before before that, even lower. So, biological sex. So that is the, you know, when you come into the world as a kicking, screaming baby, you know, that is what the doctors or nurses or midwives say. You know, this is what your baby is. This is the gender your baby is, and that's what you're assigned to at birth. So, you know, as typically is what the majority of people know is, you know, male and female. But there, as you may have remembered from the acronym, there's a range, and intersex is on that. And like all of the images on this, there's you know, there's the feeling of nothingness to the feeling of femaleness and maleness. But biological sex is what you were assigned at birth. When we go up a little higher to the heart and your emotions and what who you are physically and romantically attracted to, same thing. There's a range, and you'll notice that they're separated out because they're not always one and the same. Who you are sexually attracted to is not always who you're romantically attracted to, and you'll see there's a scale of woman, females, femininity, men, males, masculinity. So because you may be sexually or romantically attracted to women, it doesn't mean you're necessarily attracted to femininity. You can be attracted to a masculine female, a feminine male, and everything in between.
Great. I love that, Rachelle. And that's why you see on the genderbread person on the left-hand side here, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but that symbol is there for a reason. There's no man or woman on that side because it doesn't matter. You could be anyone. It doesn't matter. Everyone is attracted to whoever they're attracted to. So it's not a simple equation. It's a personal basis. So we've kind of gone over the LGBTQIA+ acronym. We've gone over some key definitions about gender identity, gender expression. This helpful genderbread person is very ideal. And now we're going to shift the conversation a little bit and head into the importance of pronouns. So Heshie, do you want to start us off with the importance of pronouns here?
So I'm just going to read from this, but you know, you have she, her, hers for female, he, him, his for male, they, them, their for gender non-binary folks, and they, zer, and zers for gender non-conforming folks. The importance of this. The importance of pronouns, especially in light of the LGBT folks and other folks at RS, is that, you know, for years, LGBT folks have been subject to discrimination and prejudice, lots of prejudice. And so now that we've made strides in society, we have, ideally, we can identify ourselves as we see ourselves, and when we ask people for their pronouns, it's important to understand that an individual may dress a certain way or look a certain way, but that has nothing to do with their identity. And so you can't assume that somebody who dresses feminine identifies as she, her, or hers. So it's best not to make any assumptions about anyone. And so that's why we invite people to give us their pronouns, so that in communication with people, you know who you're addressing, you know the identity of the person you're addressing. And it just is a way to break down barriers between different cultures. And so at the synagogue, you know, we've gotten into the habit of asking people to identify their pronouns, and it's just kind of the way we're going in society. In the striving for equality, this is just what we're able to do now, is ask people to identify their pronoun.
And to jump off that, I think the asking is a really important part. I think a lot of people are hesitant to ask because they don't want to offend, but I think using an incorrect pronoun, assumingly, is potentially more offensive. It's a courtesy. It's not an offense to ask someone's pronoun. So if you are, or if you feel like you're sure, again, don't assume, and always ask. I think people would rather have been asked than have to put themselves in a situation where they either correct you or don't correct you and then feel uncomfortable.
And just to add, it's okay if you're unsure, to just, you know, let the person you're chatting with know that this is all new to you, and you don't want to offend them, but you have a question: how do they identify? Or if you misidentify, just apologize and move on. But it's absolutely okay to say to somebody, you know, this pronoun stuff is all new to me. Identity, orientation, it's all new to me, and so I don't want to offend you. And people are very generous about that.
Yeah, and just to finish there, I really appreciate the asking for people's pronouns, but in case you're unsure of how to start that conversation, you could always just share your own pronouns first and say, hey, I'm Monica. My pronouns are they, them. What are yours? And then that way it opens up a dialogue and really starts to normalize this type of discussion, because this is where we need our allies to really come in and help the LGBTQ plus community, is to really normalize these discussions and make it just an everyday thing. Oh yeah, of course, what, you know, we're gonna ask pronouns, we're gonna share our pronouns. Every meeting I'm in, it's, hey, I'm Monica, my pronouns are they, them. And then, you know, just go right down the line. So that way, just normalizing it makes it almost routine. Totally understand how difficult this is, especially for, you know, older folks too. It's really, really hard to unlearn everything we've been taught. It's taken me years to unlearn a lot of things too. But it's important that we all work on it together and really normalize it. And if you do misgender someone or use the wrong pronouns, don't even sweat it. Don't make a big deal out of it. Don't make a scene. Don't say like, oh my God, I'm so sorry, you know, blah, blah, blah. Like, just be like, sorry, I meant they, blah, 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 and just move on. Just quickly acknowledge it, note it, and move on. So you're not making it about you. You're really just acknowledging, okay, and then moving forward. I know this is a hot topic, especially at Road of Shalom. So if there are questions about this, we can definitely chat about it at the end. We're going to head into a couple more definitions, and Rachelle's going to kick us off with cisgender.
Okay, so let me close the chat. Okay, cisgender, a term used to describe a person whose gender identity aligns with those typically associated with the sex assigned to them at birth. So as an example, for me, I identify as a cisgender woman. I identify as the sex I was assigned to at birth. So that would be female, and I use she, her pronouns.
Great. Heshie, do you want to go on with transgender?
And so transgender people have a gender identity or a gender expression that differs from their assigned sex at birth. And that's really it. You know, so you're born and you're raised either male, female, or in this society, or anything in between. A transgender person just has a different identity than their sex that they were assigned to at birth. The note is that transgender has nothing to do with sexual orientation. And so you can have a transgender individual who is gay, straight, bisexual, attracted to women, attracted to men, anywhere along the continuum.
Right.
Yeah.
And I know tends to be some confusion too when if we say like, oh, so-and-so is a trans man, or oh, they're a trans woman. And people get confused by this a lot. It's a common thing. And really what I just want to say here, to be blunt, is I think a lot of people are obsessed with our bits, our genitals, and that really just doesn't matter in the conversation. No one really needs to know about that. So when you say trans man, you could almost just eliminate the trans part and just say, oh, they're a man, that's a man, that's a woman. So when people say trans man or trans woman, it is an identifier, it is a part of their identity. Some choose to add trans in and some don't. So just know that you could always just be like, if it's a trans man, okay, that's a man. If it's a trans woman, that's a woman. And that's all I'm going to say about that. I'll finish up with non-binary and genderqueer, which is more of my realm. So it's kind of like I exist in this in-between, where I don't quite identify as a woman and I don't identify as a man. So I'm kind of like in between. So some people who identify as non-binary, they can be both man and woman, in between, or completely outside of those two categories. For me, it's just, I don't feel strongly one way or the other. And I just kind of like, well, I just kind of ignore the binary and, you know, really believe in a spectrum and things that exist beyond that realm. And it's taken me years to come through this journey and this realization. It's also similar to genderqueer, and it's basically a rejection of those static categories of gender, you know, male, female, etc. Some people embrace more of a gender fluidity, and that's where genderqueer comes into play. So I personally identify as non-binary, so we'll go into gendered language in a bit, but terms like lady, woman, girl, I don't really identify with those terms, and that plays a role into these different definitions. So we'll, if it's okay with you guys, we'll move forward a bit into gendered language and how it is out. And we kind of said earlier, Heshie was saying you shouldn't assume someone's pronouns. It's the same thing about people's gender based on their appearance. We don't know people's gender depending on how they dress. And I here made a screenshot from about a week or so ago from Facebook. During the pandemic, this pronoun check has been going viral, at least in my communities and feeds. So I decided to take part, and you do not have to be trans or non-binary or queer or not queer. Anyone and everyone should do this. It's a great pronoun check. So it's just you copy and paste the pronouns and then different gendered language, and then you write your feelings about that. So she, her, you'll see on the right, it's not preferred for me for my pronouns, but I'll accept it. He, him, I don't identify that way. They, them, yes, please. Neopronouns is a no. Neopronouns is what Heshie went over with Z, zir, zir. You'll hear those, and you know, more progressive communities, I don't choose to identify that way. I really also don't identify with Mr. or Miss or ma'am or sir, but there is MX down there, you'll see, and that's pronounced like mix, like MIX. And so it's just like an acknowledgement, like, okay, I'm not a miss, I'm not a Mrs. In fact, there was some type of mail that I received, and online I had to indicate, whatever that thing's called, I had to indicate like Miss, Mrs., Mr., or Doctor. And I was like, oh, there's no gender neutral option here. So I just clicked doctor. And so I had a letter arrive for Dr. Kramer the other day, and it just made me laugh because I'm like, you could easily just include mix in here. But so these are the kinds of things that happen on a daily basis for me where I don't have the option to choose, or I'm misgendered, or wrong pronouns are used. So things like other gendered language, I'll be at, for example, at the gym, and there'll be maybe a group of some other women, and they'll be like, hey ladies, okay, and I'm just grouped in with the ladies, and it's always like, oh, that's awkward. So it's just that assumption part, and gendered language is taking it one step further than the pronouns, than assuming gender identity. So this is a big one. This is really hard to unlearn. So Rachelle or Heshie, I'll leave it up to you if you want to add in anything there.
Yeah, one thing that keeps cycling for me, and I was gonna discuss a little bit in one of the upcoming slides, but it's really interesting. People, I've been in situations where people see someone across the street and say like, oh, look at him or her, or I don't, and then they like they're like freaking out, they can't figure out, and I always remind them, well, why does it matter, why? And that a little bit goes back to what Monica said about the bits. Like, why do you need to know what their genitals are to know what that person is like? Because that ultimately is the only definer that people are looking at. And as someone with two small children, this comes up a lot for me, because I am not, we're not, like they're in the background, we're not raising our children non-binary, but we're very aware of the binary. And I can't count how many times my son was called a girl, or my daughter hasn't been out in the world because of she's a COVID baby, but I'm sure it'll happen. And I don't correct them, it doesn't matter to me, it doesn't, but when kids are under a year, they're all just kind of little fleshy blobs anyway. So but people are so intent on knowing, and so many people ask, and if they're not wearing a bow or a truck on their shirt, I get met at the playground so many times with like, when they could easily say they, or they could ask, and it's another step of realizing how ingrained it is so early on to want to label and identify someone's gender.
Heshie, do you want to add anything, or should we continue?
Yeah, so I wanted to say that, I identify as genderqueer. And when I first came out many, many years ago, it was LGBT. And then we kept getting more letters and more letters added on to the LGBT. And it just got so confusing that I just assumed, identify as queer, because I believe gender to be on a continuum. And so I much prefer to be queer. I understand, I came up during the AIDS crisis, and so I had to learn to use language that maybe I wasn't comfortable with, but that the people that I was working with and serving, that was their language. And part of that was transgender. And so for me, it's been a learning experience, but I just identify as genderqueer, even though I'm older. I think the whole queer thing is a generational issue. I think that younger folk who are LGBT have no problems identifying as queer. And I think older people are getting on the train. I think older people are seeing the more people that identify as queer, that obviously it's not maliciously intended, but it's pretty much, where we are. Yeah.
I love that, Heshie. And so now that gendered language is out and has been for a while, we do have some easy alternatives to gendered language. So you could start just adopting on a daily basis and start unlearning and relearning. So Heshie, if you want to start us off on the top two, Rachelle will finish with the bottom two.
Heshie, you're muted.
Heshie, you're muted.
Sorry. So when I go into a meeting, I basically say good evening. Rather than good evening, ladies and gentlemen, I'll say good evening, honored guests, or good evening, distinguished guests, or good evening, RS congregants. But I purposely avoid saying ladies and gentlemen, because it's just not cool anymore to address people. And then there, you want me to do the boys, guys?
The one to the right, the girlfriend, boyfriend.
So instead of she's my girlfriend, he's my boyfriend, they're my partner, my date friend, my date mate, my babe friend, my babe. I like to say my slice, my heart, my person, my significant other. Yes, I often refer to David as my husband and my slice. So yeah.
So it's interesting because girlfriend and boyfriend, there's no real gender neutral term other than the ones listed, but traditionally, whereas husband or wife, there's spouse, and spouse isn't listed here, but that's one
also acceptable
to offer up. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Also, you know, what does it matter if your friend is a female or a male? I mean, it simply doesn't matter. They're your friend. And so you might want to think about dropping the girl, dropping the boy. Yeah.
It's also a little weird when there's, 40-plus-year-old people saying that's my girlfriend. It's like, well, are you dating a girl? No, that's a little weird, right?
Right.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, Rachelle, you want to do the boys, guys, girls, ladies?
Yeah. So boys, guys, girls, ladies. Any of these terms listed above the line are applicable, but y'all, folks with an X, people, guests, and if you're in Philadelphia, yous is a perfectly acceptable term. There's also pal and friend and
Buddy.
What's that?
Buddy.
And then over to the right, girl, boy, man, woman, person, human. And one thing I wanted to add was kid. I have 2 small children, and I'm very conscious of when I play with them with little figurines or stuffed animals that I don't gender them. And I think just them being around their grandparents or other people, there's a fireman or a policeman, or there's a little boy, there's a little girl, and I'm just acutely aware of when it's said. And obviously these aren't derogatory terms. They're not negative terms. They're just not terms that I want to assign to everything that my children come in contact with. And so when we do have little figurines, I always say kid. And the other day, my one kid came up to me and was looking for the kid with the helmet. And I just felt so proud that, he didn't say the little boy or the little girl, even though there's someone next to him saying, look, fine, get the little girl. And he said, oh, here's the kid with the helmet. And I just felt, a parental win there. So yeah, I think, I think as Monica has stated, we're all ingrained in this from a very, very early age. And, we right now have to unlearn and teach ourselves, but, moving forward, hopefully the next generation will have an easier time.
Yeah, so that's why it says down there, break the binary. So this is really where we need our allies to come in to normalize the discussion around pronouns and breaking our habits of gendered language. So just doing this and influencing your people in your sphere and your communities, it's going to go a long way for everyone involved. So break the binary. Again, we're just getting away from that the one, this or that, one or the other, male, female, masculine, feminine, and just realizing that things are mostly on a spectrum. So we are going to head to our last slide of some more language do's and don'ts. These are only a few terms that I picked out. You can view more terms at the link at the bottom when I send out the presentation. So we're going to start with the column on the right, the avoid column. Some people, especially for trans folks, will say, oh, he was born female. You want to avoid saying things like that, and the proper terminology there on the left would be AFAB or AMAB. You'll hear these, you'll see these acronyms on social media, and that's just assigned female or assigned male at birth. Remember that gender is assigned. It's not, no one knows someone's gender. It's all up in your head, as Heshie pointed out. So these are types of things that we want to avoid saying. The middle one here on transgender, this is really important. I've heard several people say transgendered, ED at the end, which is pretty offensive. Same thing saying a transgender. You just want to just say trans or just transgender. Transvestite and tranny are very derogatory, so these are definitely to be avoided. The one I most commonly hear is transgendered in probably the ally community, and I think it's just lack of knowledge. So you just want to be careful to just say trans. Just say trans, that way you don't have to worry about the ending. And you'll sound even more woke that way if you just say trans. So that's your safest bet. And then transition on the left is what we want to focus on, not saying things like sex change, the surgery, like, oh, has he had the surgery, sex change operation. These are, again, really focusing on someone's genitals. So just saying transition is much more respectable and accepted. Rachelle and Heshie, if you'd like to add in anything here, by all means.
I just want to read a comment that Jerry posted saying that transgendered is like saying reformed Jew.
Love that.
Yeah. And I want to say that I kind of find it very rude that somebody asks questions like, did you have your surgery? I mean, focusing on private issues that we would never talk with with anyone about. It would kind of, I'm trying to think, saying to a woman, did you have your hysterectomy yet? It's just, it's honest concern, or, but it's just not something you would ask. And so there's no reason to ask somebody about their transition or their transition surgery. Best to leave it for that person to tell you about that journey. I remember on a Friday night when Ari Rubinson shared about his surgery that he was having, his top surgery that he was having, and how he went to Florida, the whole experience, and it was a beautiful share. But you would never go up to him and say, hey, Ari, did you have your surgery yet? Just rude, so don't do it.
Yeah, it's, if someone is sharing that they are trans or they are in the process of transition and transitioning, that puts them in such a vulnerable state, but it puts yourself in a state of trust. And for them to share that with you, to then go back and ask, such personal questions that you would not ask anyone else, is a complete sign of disrespect. And I don't think people, I think people think that once that door is open, that they have the right to inquire about that, but it's not okay.
Yeah, great. And our last slide here, we'd like to open it up now to some questions, some Q&A. So Rachelle, if you want to start checking out the chat, or.
Yeah, so there are a few questions that popped up. One was to talk a little bit more about the distinction between romantic and sexual attraction. We'll start there. So I touched a little on that and saying that they're not one and the same. So sexual attraction, and obviously you folk jump in, and I just said you guys, so I just caught myself saying that, and that's something that's just ingrained in me. I say you guys, and I'm really trying not to say guys. Anyway, as hard as it is for everyone, it's hard for everyone, but that's something I just caught myself doing. So sexual versus romantic, one can be romantically attracted to a different kind of person that they're sexually attracted to, and again, on the spectrum of male, female, masculine, feminine, and every identity in between. They're often one and the same, but they're not always. I don't know if you want to jump in on any differentiations there.
No, I mean, I just tell people that that sexuality, that everything is on a continuum. Sexuality is on a continuum, expressions on a continuum, and so you can be male, you can be female, you can be anything along that spectrum, and you can identify as anything along that spectrum, and that's okay.
And there's a term that I think is a little more common that was not mentioned or was not listed here, which is pansexual. And I hear a lot of people say, well, what's the difference between pansexual and bisexual? That just means you're, attracted to both sexes. And again, that, we need to kind of squash the idea that there's only two sexes. So someone who is, sorry, my kid is just running by naked right now. So I think we just need to, remind ourselves and get over the fact that there's only two sexes, and that to be sexually or romantically attracted to someone doesn't just mean they're attracted to one sex or the other.
Yeah, and I would go ahead and say romantic attraction is more of an emotional response. You can be romantically attracted to someone and not sexually attracted to someone, and vice versa. So I think it's about the emotional aspect when someone is romantically attracted to them, as opposed to sexually attracted, which involves, sex. Yeah, next question.
So someone was asking to delve a little more into the non-binary term, and that was before the non-binary slide popped up. So are we okay on that? Who was that, Marilyn?
Marilyn Essner.
Oh, Marilyn, yeah, so.
Yeah, that was me. I think I'm clear. I wouldn't mind if you did a little more, but so what this is about is non-groupness, right? There's no us and them in this. We're all sexually and romantically the same, except that there's, as you say, a continuum. So this eliminates us and them, that they are this and I am that.
Everybody is on the continuum, but not everybody knows, understands, accepts that they're on a continuum. So there are some people who are heteronormative people who only think in terms of black and white, male and female. But it is a continuum, and again, I place myself on the continuum at this point, and then later on in life, I was at this point, and then I went back to being this point, and I just felt okay about it. I'm a sexual being, and I had I needed to try things. And but Marilyn, to your point, there are those people who don't understand sexuality or expression and identity. And then there are those people, I want to say evolved people, enlightened people who get it. And so I think I like to think of it as those folks who get it, and then there are those folks who don't get it, are resistant to it. So in that respect, they're them, and I'm me. And I only in life look for people who have similar values to me. So being on that part of the continuum. So it is a we them, but I don't see it as kind of a battle type of thing. It's just, there are racist people and there are people who are not racist.
And then there are people who are trying, I'm trying to understand all this. I'm 100 years old.
Yeah.
This is all very, very revolutionary in a way.
Exactly.
And so, I'm on a continuum of learning.
Well, you're evolving.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're evolving.
This is wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I just wanted to bring up that it is 4 o'clock. We have to close out. Let's see. So we have to close out the formal session and can invite. So I think we can stay and chat for 15 more minutes. Is that correct, Gail?
Correct, yeah. So
Okay.
anyone who would like to stay can stay.
And as people may or may not be signing off, I just wanted to bring up there was a question about gender fluidity, and the question was whether gender is in constant flux or if it is not fixed on either end. Let me see if I can find the question.
And in the meantime, I'm going to put the link for our evaluation for our session in the chat. So if everyone could copy and paste that and open it in your browser on your computer, let us know what you thought of our session. If you have any comments or feedback, we'd greatly appreciate hearing from you all.
And thank you everyone for attending and learning with us.
Yeah, and I just want to say that, there are no stupid questions. There are no stupid questions. So if you don't understand, if you have a question, please feel free to ask Monica, Rachelle, myself. There are other folks. We can steer you to resources. In fact, there's a list of resources, I think, in the beginning of this, or maybe not, but we'll get you to resources. And so just remember, no stupid questions.
Okay,
Yeah.
I have a stupid question.
All right, Jerry.
Oh, Jerry, try anything.
Did you like that?
I did.
My question was, maybe Rachelle and Monica didn't see it, but I wrote, is it no longer PC if you hear me use his, her in a conversation with someone I know for years?
No, and that's why I mentioned briefly earlier, like his and her are not bad terms. They're not derogatory. They're just no longer assumptions.
No. I'm saying if I'm talking to Ellen, and I think I know that Ellen is really a woman, and you hear me talking to her, and I happen to be using the word her, referring to her, would you, as a much younger person than me, would you be offended that I'm still using words like that? Or is it only if I'm talking to somebody that I don't know is a woman? You understand?
Yeah, so I think that Ellen to be female and you can address her as a female. I think that if you're looking at younger generation and you don't know that the person is male, female, or anything in between, then you want to know what their pronoun is.
No,
How
no,
they
no, that's not what I'm asking at all. If I absolutely positively know somebody, even I know young people, I really actually know people in their 20s, and I know that they're male or female. If you, who might be sensitive to this because you're one of the leaders, and you hear me using words like his and her in a conversation with somebody that I absolutely know is his or her, am I being non-PC?
No.
It's only if it's somebody I don't know.
Correct. If you
Okay.
if you know these people, and who are we to say, oh no, you can't use his or her? If you know them and those are their pronouns, then you use their pronouns. We're never going to step in. It's only when assumption starts playing a role and you're like, I personally, I don't even use like male or female. I heard both Heshie and Jerry saying that, and like Ellen is a female. Personally, I don't ever make that assumption. I don't say Ellen's a female. I just say I've seen Ellen's pronouns are she, her. So that's how I address Ellen. She, her, hers. But I don't ever go into identity there.
No, maybe it's not, I'm not making myself clear. It's kind of like if I said nigger, for example, that's very un-PC, okay? Unless it's to somebody like black people say that to other black people. So there's certain words that some of us are very, very sensitive to and think are totally non-PC anymore.
Yeah.
So I guess my question is, are there people who would still be offended, even if I'm using his or her to people that I know them, but they might ruffle their feathers and say, you can't say his and her anymore. Are we going in that direction where that's not going to be okay anymore?
Yeah, his and her are not derogatory terms. They're not offensive terms. They're only offensive if you misgender someone that you don't know.
Okay.
When you're talking about someone you do know, again, like what Monica said, who are we to know? So no. The short answer is no. One thing that my wife and I always joke about is that our when we're referring to someone, our grandkids are going to say, if we're saying like, oh, if my wife's name is Meg, like, oh, she blah, blah, blah. And they're going to say, oh, grandparents, there's no such thing as gender anymore. But as of right now, the short answer is no.
Okay. I don't want the PC police after me.
No, you don't.
Thank you.
So I have a question about how it feels to you and your different generations, Rachelle and Monica from Heshie. Is this a brave new world? Is it scary? Is it fabulously liberating? Is it confusing for you as it is for the rest of us? Where are you with that?
You're on.
I'll jump in there. I think a little bit of all of that. I think it's scary for some people who it's not familiar with or it's not comfortable with. I think it's fabulous for people who didn't have these terms before and now they feel like they fit in somewhere where they didn't otherwise feel comfortable. Having the strict binary feels great and feels fine for people, but people who didn't necessarily feel comfortable in their skin before now have language and now have community around it.
Well, yeah, it's the language of our community. And so wanting to embrace my community, wanting to learn all the facets of the community, I kind of just jump in and I'm kind of like a sponge. And I love hearing about difference and about the community. And so I try to use the language, or I try to be clear about what my language is when addressing somebody, or asking questions saying, hey, this is all new to me, and I don't mean to offend, and then I'll ask a question, and if I offend, they'll tell me, and I will, apologize and move on. So I embrace it, and it is different because, my generation, when you say queer, they bristle, and I remember bringing the first thing to RS. Actually, when we talked about PRISM and the mission of PRISM, we talked about queer community, and I remember Catherine Fisher was like, "Oh, I don't know if we can use the term queer here at RS." And I was like, "Well, I'm queer. I mean, that's how I identify, and so we're going to use it." And I think, you know, over time, people have grown used to hearing it and understand that it's not pejorative at this point. It's only pejorative if you have pejorative thoughts when you use it.
Yeah, I totally feel the same way, Gail. I feel I'm more of the younger generation of we're finally getting around to this change, and people are open to it and embracing it for the most part. It's just a big learning curve. So I think a lot of patience is involved. But you know, older folks, both queer and not queer, you know, we all have families and older folks that, you know, are in our sphere. And so having to explain these concepts, these identities, these terms to my mom, you know, it's enlightening. And, you know, these are difficult conversations, and there are no books written on how to talk to your parent that you're non-binary, or, you know, these are really hard things. And so I truly understand where everyone's coming from. And I'm just grateful that our community at RS in particular is open to learning more. That's really important to me, and just embracing it and asking the questions. So yeah, looks like Rabbi Mater posted in the chat here. I also appreciate the way the conversation challenges us to see whether we treat people differently because of their gender. I love the way it challenges gender roles we might not have realized we were still assuming. Yes, gender roles. I love this. I'm all about, you know, getting rid of those gender roles. And, you know, it's the same thing in a lot of, you know, queer relationships, you know, same-sex relationships. You know, the whole like, who wears the pants? And questions like that.
How many times have you heard, well, who's the man?
Yeah, who's the man?
Right.
How does that work? How did you have a baby, Rachelle?
Yeah, yeah. Magic.
How did you have a baby?
I just say immaculate conception.
Oh, that's great.
Hail Mary.
Yeah. Does anyone else have any questions? Anything they
No,
want
but I'd like to say something. It feels as though whatever the identified group of people is that wants you to use certain words, theirs are the prerogatives that should hold. So I'm Jewish and I don't mind being called a Jew, but I don't like being called a Yid. So people, when they're in my presence, should not use the word Yid, even if they don't have malicious intent. They shouldn't use it because they should be sensitive to my preferences because I'm the identified person. So I think this is the same thing, don't you?
I mean,
Have
Well-
to add yid to your pronouns.
I would just, Marilyn, I would just hope that if you are with folks, some of whom or someone addresses you or refers to you as a yid, that you would take that opportunity, like as an educable moment, to say to
Right.
that person, not cool.
Right,
We don't
but
use that term.
it wouldn't be cool for that person to say I didn't mean anything by it. I mean, what would be cool is to say, I won't do it again.
I apologize that it was offensive. I won't do it again, period.
Right.
Well, I think, you know, we can't necessarily dictate how people will apologize or how people will react. The only thing we can do is say what we prefer and what we don't prefer. And I think us speaking up if someone is misgendered or spoken to in a way that, you know, or described in a way that you don't like, I think the thing that we can do moving forward is let the other person know. And that's how the conversation starts, and that's how we move forward.
But may I say something, Rachelle, that
Please do.
it's not appropriate to say to somebody, what pronoun do you prefer?
correct.
Not a preference.
Correct.
This is not a preference. It is. It's not a preference. And so
That's a good. That's
how
a
do
good
you, what pronoun would you like me to use, or what pronoun do you identify?
Or what are your pronouns?
What are your pronouns? Not take the preference out of it.
Yeah, and for a while, PFP was, you know, like, what's your preferred pronoun? And that was the language, and we've moved past that. So it's not a preferred, as she said. Yeah, so thank you. That's a good reminder.
Always evolving.
Always evolving.
Always onwards and upwards.
That's right. Any remaining questions?
Is Gail still here? I know she had a question about gender fluidity.
I am still here, but I'm noticing that it's 4:14.
Okay,
But I know where to find you.
that's true. You do.
Thank
Hopefully
you.
everyone
Thank
does.
you all.
If other questions pop up.
Wonderful.
And as Heshie said, there's no stupid questions. This is, you know, we're all learning. It's evolving. So please, you know, don't feel silly asking. That's why this exists.
Yeah, thank you all so much for attending,
you.
for listening, for participating. Your questions and being here just means the world to all of us at RS. I did just post the link to the evaluation in the chat box. So please just go ahead. It should only take you a couple minutes to fill that out. We'd love to hear your feedback. And, you know, reach out. We're always here. And again, I will make this presentation shareable. It's just a quick link. You can look at it again. You can share it with friends if you found it helpful, if you want to review. So I will make that available. And thank you all so much.
Nice
Thank
job.
you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Hello.
Wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Great seeing everyone's faces.
Thank you, thank you.
Kind of pictures all
Joining us.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye all.